and a very warm welcome to the interview on France 24. I'm Sanam Chantier. Today we'll be speaking about a woman who wrote about humanity in extremis. Those are the words of Marie Colvin, one of the most celebrated war reporters of our time. This month, her story is being told on both the big screen in a film called A Private War and in a biography aptly titled In Extremis, the life of war correspondent Marie Colvin, written by her colleague and friend, Lindsey Hilsum. Lindsey, who says they perceived themselves as the, quote, Thelma and Louise of the press corps, is the international editor for Channel 4 News, and she herself has covered many of the conflicts of the recent years. She joins me from London. Lindsey, thanks so much for speaking to us.
It's a pleasure, Sanam.
Now, In Extremis, your book is a deeply personal account of Marie's life and career. For me, it was haunting and at times hilarious. And of course, to tell the story, you had access to her personal diaries, which she'd kept since she was a teenager.
And that was the most extraordinary thing, because I knew Marie, we were friends on the road, but I wasn't her best friend. I was in her outer circle. If I'd been her very best friend, I don't think I could have written this, because I wouldn't have had any distance, but I did have a little bit of distance. And then I found that she kept 300 journals, diaries and notebooks, right from when she was a teenager, when she was 13, up to almost just before she was killed. And so they gave me an incredible insight, not just into the work she did when she was covering, you know, the wars in Kosovo, Chechnya, East Timor and so on, but also her innermost thoughts and feelings.
Lindsey, I think I must have lost count of the number of times that you point out that she was the only woman there, whether it was in Libya or Kosovo or Syria. And that's a running theme. You actually write in the early stages of her career, Marie was praised for thinking like a man, yet others said the fact that she was a woman added to her allure. Would you say that being a female reporter was a handicap or an asset for Marie?
I think it was an asset, but sometimes that's a bit charged. I mean, Marie, like myself and probably you, we don't think of ourselves as female reporters or female conflict correspondents. We think of ourselves as reporters. It's not that men are normal and women are an aberration. But, I mean, Marie did feel that, you know, the fact that she was a woman gave her some advantages. Certainly, you know, if you're trying to get to a roadblock, you're going to get through a roadblock in a dodgy place. Women are often seen as less threatening than men, so sometimes that's easier. And certainly, you know, in some countries where women and men live rather separate lives, it's hard for male correspondents to go and talk to the women who are maybe, you know, in the kitchen or behind the curtain. And women can go and do that and get all of the story. But I think that also, you know, there was a certain glamour about Marie. She lost the sight in her left eye when crossing a front line in Sri Lanka. And after that, she always wore an eye patch. It became her trademark, a badge of her bravery. But she also had one studded with rhinestones for parties.
And Lindsey, you say that women are less threatening, but of course in the biography you also address sexual harassment and about how Marie was nearly raped on one of her missions, about how the late Libyan dictator Gaddafi had taken something of a shine to her. Now, all of this at a time when we didn't have social media or the Me Too movement, when there wasn't such a seemingly strict stance against harassment. Was it in that sense a struggle for her?
Well, I think she rather took it in her stride, you know, and that is a difference between the generations. I mean, the generation now of women who, you know, won't put up with anything, and I rather admire them, because Marie and my generation, you know, we shrugged it off, we pushed them away. I mean, this occasion when she wrote in her diary that she was almost raped by a source in Libya, and she said she fought him off. She was pretty strong, and she had to be. But I saw no sign that she was traumatized by that at all. I think she just got on with it. She thought that was, you know, part of the job. You just had to put up with it, push them aside and not let anything get in your way. And I think that that was one of the things about Marie. She was utterly determined to get her story, and nothing was going to stop her.
Now, as part of the job in the book, you write that her friends were the kind of people that were written about. She was mingling with everyone from the editor of British Vogue to the creator of Bridget Jones, and of course world leaders like Gaddafi and Yasser Arafat. In fact, you say that Arafat's wife described her as one of us, not an intruder. Was that, would you say, the secret to Marie's success?
Yeah, I mean, she had a sort of chameleon-like personality in the sense that she could fit in anywhere. I found out that this goes back to her childhood, and as a teenager, she worked as a waitress in a very fancy sailing club. And she found, somewhat to her surprise, that she was just as relaxed with the incredibly fancy people, the sort of Roosevelt and Kennedy-type people at this sailing club in Oyster Bay on Long Island, as she was with the waiting staff like her. She really didn't discriminate. She was very, very happy and comfortable in all of these places. And I think that she had an ability to make Arafat and Gaddafi, these powerful men, also Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli leader, to make them relax. I mean, she bonded with Yitzhak Rabin because they were both inveterate smokers. So during the interview, they just went out and had a fag. And certainly with Arafat, an awful lot of time was spent with his aides, drinking whiskey and smoking late into the night. So she had that ability just to make people want to talk to her. And then in London, yeah, she had a pretty glamorous social life in London. But I think that was also, she had a network of female friends here. And that was really what stability she had in her life, and she didn't have enough stability, was provided by this circle of female friends here in London.
You speak about the glamorous side, but of course we mustn't forget Marie in many ways redefined reporting. She was a journalist who just wasn't able to leave the victims behind. She was even credited with saving 1,500 refugees in East Timor. Would you say that the lines for her between journalism and activism were blurred at times?
Well, Marie was not ideological. She was not a person who believed in this cause or that cause, right-wing or left-wing. She was not a journalist who went in to do what I would call paint-by-numbers journalism, to find the facts to fit her story. She was very impartial in that classic sense of Western journalism. However, she absolutely had a thing for the underdog. And yes, she said that, you know, if you go in bare and you eat with the people and live as they do, then you get a sense of their lives, which you don't if you have a separation. And so she didn't separate herself in that way. And certainly in East Timor, this was a situation when the militia were besieging the UN compound, and other journalists, their editors, ordered them out. Marie and two colleagues, two Dutch journalists, Minka and Irina, stayed, and a small group of UN staff. And Marie felt that she would be abandoning the people if she left. And she felt that it was her duty and responsibility to stay there and to broadcast what was happening. And it was partly because of those broadcasts that there was a lot of international pressure. And in the end, the Indonesian government, who was sponsoring the militia, caved in and allowed an international force led by the Australians to come in and keep the peace.
And Lindsey, in your words, Marie always went in further and stayed longer. Having written her biography, having known her as a friend, can you now answer the question that you posed at the very beginning of the book? Was she brave or indeed reckless?
That is such a hard question. And arguably, I mean, there's no question that she was brave. But she took bravery too far. And, you know, at the end, she was in Bab el-Amr, the besieged enclave in Syria, where she had got herself smuggled in to report on the people who were being attacked by President Bashar al-Assad's forces. And, you know, she did her story and she left, and then she went back in again. And she went back in again because she felt she had abandoned those people. Now, you can argue that that was reckless. It was certainly beyond brave, and it led to her death. That's why she's not with us now. But she did that out of commitment to the story and commitment to those people. She also did it out of competition, because when she was back in, a group of journalists, including the famous French journalists Edith Bouvier and Remy Oshlik and William Daniels, went in. And once they arrived, she didn't want to leave because she also wanted to get the story. So, you know, Marie was a competitive journalist like everybody, you know, like all the others. And that ended in tragedy because she and Remy Oshlik were both killed by a Syrian government mortar.
Of course they were. And some have blamed her employers, actually, the Sunday Times, for sending her to her death, because Marie's risks were getting them their best stories. Do you agree with that assessment? I
think that Marie and her editors created an image for her, and it was one that she liked, that she bought into, and it was this brave, bold, glamorous woman journalist with the eye patch who will stop at nothing, who will risk her life to get the story, to get the best story. And she did get the best stories for them, and they benefited from that. But sometimes I suppose the tragedy of Marie is, although she believed in that image and that was one she wanted for herself, she didn't always feel that inside. And she did suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly after she'd lost the sight in her left eye. And she had to come to terms with the fragility of her body, but she found it very hard to come to terms with the fragility of her mind. She was treated for PTSD, and there were some who argued that after that she should not have gone back into the field. But on that final trip, she didn't tell her foreign editor that she was going back in because she knew that he would say she shouldn't. She didn't tell me either, even though she and I had been in touch almost every day. She only called me and him after she had gone back in. So that was her decision to go back in, and it was a fateful decision.
Lindsey, finally and briefly, I want to ask you a question that perhaps draws on your own experience. Journalists like Marie and more recently Jamal Khashoggi, they paid the ultimate price. They were targeted in very different ways for their work. Should there be limits to how far journalists go?
Who is going to impose the limits? Of course there should be limits. And of course editors should take responsibility. But in the end, you know, you can't say Jamal Khashoggi went too far. He did what he thought was right. And then he came up against the people who did not want him to tell the truth. And arguably so did Marie. I think that Marie's journalism of eyewitness reporting means that they can never say that they didn't know. Of course they knew. Marie told them.
Marie told them. On that note, Lindsey, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Lindsey Hilsum, international editor at Channel 4 News, the writer of this brilliant book in Extremis, the life of war correspondent Marie Colvin. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And thank you for watching the interview on France 24.
You might watch France 24 in English, but don't forget, France 24 is also broadcast in French, Arabic, and Spanish.
Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a las noticias de France 24.
Available on cable and satellite systems and online media in France and around the world.